Can we start with Benjamin Netanyahu, who we just heard speaking there? He's now taken out Mohammed Deif, Marwan Issa and Yahya Sinwar, the trifecta who were running Hamas, the leadership in Gaza. He's taken out Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon. Is he having a very good war?
Well, in many ways, yes. I mean, what he's done in recent weeks and months is just stunning. And some counterterrorism experts are saying it's the greatest anti-terrorist campaign ever. And indeed, the former head of the CIA, General Petraeus, who was head of the CIA at the time that Osama bin Laden was taken out by the Americans in 2011, Petraeus says this achievement of getting Sinwar is more important than American taking out bin Laden, because Sinwar wasn't just the sort of political head, he was an operational head in a way that bin Laden wasn't. He was the most feared guy in Gaza for Palestinians. I mean, he was notorious for having fellow Palestinians die in excruciating ways. In one case, somebody had to bury his own brother alive. In another case, Sinwar himself strangled to death a Palestinian using a keffiyeh, a Palestinian headscarf. He strangled him in a cemetery and killed him. So Netanyahu, yes, look, I think he's up against enormous pressure, really the whole world. I mean, let's start with President Biden and Vice President Harris. At every stage in this war, even though they have supplied weapons to Israel, they have been calling for ceasefires at what I would say is the wrong moment. I mean, Sinwar was found in Rafah. Harris famously said, I've studied the maps, don't go into Rafah. Biden threatened Netanyahu for going into Rafah to get Sinwar. Who else? Chuck Schumer, the Senate majority leader, he called for Netanyahu to resign rather than going to Rafah, and Netanyahu defied them. He defied also British politicians, including David Cameron, and French and German politicians. He went into Rafah, and it was sort of mission accomplished. They have taken control of a lot of Rafah, and they've got Sinwar and lots of other Hamas leaders.
Yes, but as I said in my sort of preliminary remarks, with Hamas, with a terrorist organization which has got, it doesn't have a command structure as such now. It is now apparently, we are told by the BBC, a guerrilla insurgency, and therefore much harder to eliminate root and branch. So, yes, huge victory on the scale of Osama bin Laden, as David Petraeus has been saying, but not mission accomplished. I don't see how you can justify calling what's
No,
happened in Gaza mission accomplished at this
I
point.
meant mission accomplished in Rafah.
Okay.
No, it's not yet. The war's not yet finished, as Netanyahu said. And indeed, today in Berlin, as we just heard on your clip from Keir Starmer and also Biden and others in Berlin today, all calling for an immediate ceasefire. An immediate ceasefire would allow Hamas to stay in control. That is not good for anyone, first and foremost the population of Gaza, who have to live under the terror of Hamas. Many or most of them don't want that. Look, of course, you don't finish a movement just by killing the head of it, but for sure, both ISIS and Al Qaeda are shadows of their former selves after the US took out the leaders of ISIS and Al Qaeda. So Hamas will not be totally eliminated, but it can be removed as the governing power in Gaza, allowing a more sort of peaceful form of Palestinian self-governance. What we want in Gaza is a government that will use international aid to build a better life for Palestinians, not one that will spend all the money building up an arms arsenal to fire rockets into Israel or a network of tunnels. That is possible. It's definitely possible, and I think Israel's on the way to doing it.
What do you say to those who would point out that Israel can never be secure, this war can never end, while there are 5 million Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, and a further 2 million in Israel itself, and without national self-determination for those and mutual recognition, this war can never end?
Oh, wait a second. Let's just, first of all, let's talk about Israeli Arabs or Israeli Palestinians. Hardly any of them want to join a Palestinian state. Every single opinion poll shows they much rather live in Israel. And it's a kind of myth propagated by left-wing journalists in certain quarters, not on LBC, that they don't want to live in Israel. I mean,
not exclusively on LBC. No, I mean,
not,
I agree. The 2 million, and
but
of course, on
of course,
October the 7th, it was hoped, Hamas hoped that those 2 million Arab Israelis would join the movement, the Al-Aqsa flood, which they didn't.
no,
And
lots of them have joined the IDF. There's been a
exactly,
recruitment
but
drive it's made them more Israeli, not less. But to answer your wider question, of course, Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank should have self-government, and they do have self-government to a large extent in the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority. But the problem is, what kind of government? They need a government that actually is not corrupt and interested in state building. And, you know, Gaza could be quite a prosperous place. It's geographically very well located on the Mediterranean, in between Europe, Asia, and Africa. There's oil or gas offshore. The problem, the population's educated and so on. The problem is governance, okay? It will be rebuilt after this war. It's been rebuilt after previous wars, but there's no point in rebuilding it and then having a crazy jihadi type movement governing the place.
And
So
what, sorry, Tom, can I
question.
just interrupt to ask a question about governance? Because I was at a breakfast this morning and I said it's terrific news that Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, the author of the massacre, has been taken out. And the man next to me said, yes, and I wish it were Benjamin Netanyahu next. There is a feeling that both sides are run by extremists. What is the feeling about Benjamin Netanyahu now? Is it that he should also be removed from office as a precondition for any kind of path to peace in the Middle East?
This is ridiculous. Israel is a democracy. He has won fair and square. There's no accusation of vote tampering like Trump and Biden and others have made in America. The Israeli system is more democratic in a way than the British system. And the Israeli electorate will vote him out of office if they don't like him at the next election. In a previous term, he signed 4 peace deals with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. The first 3 of those are highly successful. During this war, Morocco and the UAE have increased cooperation with Israel, whereas almost every day their criticisms of Israel from politicians in Europe and the United States. In the Middle East, both governments, but also even countries that don't have relations with Israel, like Saudi Arabia, Oman, and so on, even in Lebanon, Iran, the people are actually quietly supportive of Israeli actions because Netanyahu is the only one standing up to the mullahs of Tehran who de facto control Lebanon, Yemen, parts of Iraq, Gaza. So, you know, where is the West? Who is the leader of the free world? An Iranian friend said Netanyahu is now the leader of the free world. An Australian ambassador said to me quietly the other day, he said, look, I can't say this publicly because it's like, you know, talking about trans publicly or something. But he said, his experienced ambassador, served all over the Middle East and Asia and so on. He said Netanyahu is by far the greatest statesperson in the world today. Now, that doesn't mean Netanyahu is perfect. I can list many flaws, and Israelis will list many flaws with domestic policies and the religious and so on within Israel. But in terms of the big vision, okay, who is pushing for democracy? Who opposed a deal with Yasser Arafat? Netanyahu wasn't against a Palestinian self-governance in the West Bank. He was against handing over territory to someone who wasn't Nelson Mandela. Likewise, when Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2006, it wasn't about withdrawing from Gaza. It was about withdrawing from Gaza without making sure there will be a government in place that actually wants peace. And it was kind of predicted that Hamas would take over, and it did.
Can I just ask you one last question, Tom Gross, which is this? The international opinion is not completely aligned with your view of Benjamin Netanyahu and his success in prosecuting this war. So can you just, to conclude, explain to our listeners where you think Israel's real enemies lie?
Well, I want to say 2 things. International opinion is very anti-Netanyahu, as is much opinion in Israel. But his supporters would say he's Churchillian in the sense that Churchill was also very unpopular. Netanyahu, who's the son of an eminent historian, he reads Greek, Roman, and all kinds of other history, and he also sees himself in historical terms. In the big picture, I suspect he's got it right, even if right now the opinion is very, very much against him. A little bit like Reagan. People used to attack Reagan all the time, but now people say, yes, he stood up to the communists and so on, and he helped oversee the downfall of the Soviet Union. Where does the enemy lie? In a sense, the enemy is worse in the West, including even among the left in particular, even among some Jews in London, Paris, and New York, seem to be more anti-Israel than lots of Arabs in the Middle East. Now, there are Muslims in the West who are not pro-Israel, but if you are an ordinary Lebanese or Iraqi, you want your countries to be more like Israel. In other words, to have rights for women, to be more democratic and so on.
Well, I completely subscribe to those desires too, and to see the institution of more pluralist, modern, liberal democracies, whatever their faults, throughout that region. Thank you so much, Tom Gross, international affairs commentator.